Good morning, everyone. I am Matt Clark with Veritas CFO, and today I'm lucky to have Ken Adamo on our podcast. Ken is the Chief of Analytics at DAT Freight and Analytics. DAT is the leading truckload freight marketplace in North America, and Ken is also a 2021 Pro to Know by Supply and Demand Chain Executive Magazine. So Ken, welcome to the show. Excited to have you join today, and congratulations on being Pro to Know.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, that was somewhat unexpected, but a cool honor. It's a really great company when you look through all the folks that have been on that before. Real humbling to be even mentioned in the same conversation as those folks.
Yeah. Well, and then congratulations on your new baby boy, Forrest Ryan's a couple of weeks old now, right?
Yeah, I was just mentioning earlier, it's we went from man to man to zone, right? Because now we have three, and my wife and I are outnumbered. So it's been quite the adventure over the last 3 weeks. A lot different than having two.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, sure, you have to be proud. And then I heard on one of your webinars, you like to fish too, right? But I assume Forrest is probably cut into your fishing trips.
Maybe I can bring them along, get one of those little baby Bjorn things, whatever they're called, and bring them along. Usually I have something there that holds my beer and my fishing vest. I'll have to have something that holds the baby. But no, we're avid hunter and fishermen. I plan to have all of the boys raised in the outdoors. It should be fun to have. My oldest is 6, and he's probably at least a few years away from at least walking through the woods with me at deer season. But I'm excited to bring him along.
Yeah, that's great. So we've got a lot of informative topics to talk about today. But before we jump into the freight market, can you share with us your role at DAT and your experience prior to DAT?
Sure. Yeah. So at DAT, as you mentioned, I'm Chief of Analytics. I have 3 primary areas of responsibility. I have our data science team. And we're really our production data science shop. So we're doing research and development, building analytical models, and then moving them into production. You can see evidence of that in our new product releases. MCI and Ratecast were both heavily involved with data science development. And then push to production. I also have commercial analytics, which is a lot of our translating that kind of really technical stuff into consumable formats for our customers, whether that be BI dashboards, custom data feeds, consulting services, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have industry analysis. So just folks that have been in the industry, around the industry, can give us insight to help wrap everything we do technically in context, as well as create really great content for our customers and partners to consume. Prior to that, I was actually a DAT customer for the better part of 7 years at FedEx, doing pricing, data science, process engineering, all of that kind of fun stuff. And then going way back, what kind of originally piqued my interest in analytics, I was at a deregulated energy provider doing pricing forecasting. It wasn't even called data science back then, right? A lot of physical on-prem SaaS type stuff, not SaaS, SAS, Cary, North Carolina SaaS, doing that kind of work. So I haven't been around that long, but it seems like an eternity, at least in our industry, as fast as it moves.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of great experience. And so, one thing that fascinates me about in your current role is, well, it seemed with FedEx, you didn't have as much visibility, at least I've seen that you have with DAT. So, how'd you make how the transition go from more of, crunching numbers to being out kind of one of the faces of the public for DAT?
Yeah, I mean, as a kind of natural introvert, it's been a bit uncomfortable at times, but it's twofold. The team at DAT has made a tremendous investment in getting me the training and sort of coaching that I need to be successful and sort of figure out tools and techniques to get out of my shell a little bit and interact. But I will say it started at FedEx and just evangelize. I feel like as you grow in leadership from doing the work, the further you get removed away from doing the work, the more you need to evangelize for the work. What I mean by that is data science is a hefty investment, right? These folks justifiably command a very high level of investment from the organization, both in time, patience, and then ultimately with money. So convincing folks that maybe don't have the technical background that this is a necessity, not a nice to have, once they come on board, kind of playing interference while they get up to speed, because a heavy part of the data science process is research, and the research may not be fruitful for quarters at a time. Keeping the kind of ROI at bay, if you will, and then ultimately sharing in success has all been a part of the process. And the only thing that's really different at DAT is I get to do that with the market as a whole. At FedEx, I'd be summarily terminated if I went on a podcast, I'm assuming. Whereas here, that's kind of part of the gig. And I've loved it. It's connecting with new people. We're having our big annual conference live this year in person. I'm beyond thrilled to actually interact with people live and in person at that. So it's been fun.
Yeah. That's it's great to hear. So DAT started out in 1978 at a truck stop in Portland, Oregon. DAT stands for Dial a Truck, which I never knew. But
yeah,
obviously a huge load board. How many loads are posted on a daily basis or annually?
So I pulled some interesting stats for you. So the 2020 stats are completely useless at this point, right? Our summary stats for 2020. I think in 2020, the number I have is, hold please, it was over 200 million, 228 million loads, roughly speaking. But sometime this month, probably right about now, we will actually surpass that entire number just in the first half in a few days of 21. So just last month, we had just a hair under 40 million loads posted. It's been sort of bouncing around in that 40 million territory. Just remarkable engagement, right? You talk about like coming out of your shell, like having to translate what's going on in the market to a bunch of software engineers who don't really know much about freight at all. Like, why is this happening? Why every Monday are our servers ready to catch on fire? It's just been a remarkable run, this huge rush to the spot market. But yeah, we've surpassed 100,000 carriers in our network and growing. We're adding carriers at an absolute record clip as more and more carriers strike out on their own and hang their shingle to become smaller fleets or independent owner operators. It's just been a remarkable year of growth in a segment of the industry that we serve as our core segment.
Yeah, it's certainly incredible times in the freight market. That's for sure. And
yeah.
So, certainly since you've been on board, seen more analytics coming through DAT. You've got this, you mentioned Ratecast forecasting tool and 90% accuracy rate. Can you talk about the Ratecast and how do you get to a 90% accuracy rate? I mean, that's unbelievable in itself.
Yeah, I mean, so we launched Ratecast spring of last year. Ratecast is our rate forecasting engine for spot and contract truckload rates for dry van, flatbed, and reefer. I'm not going to get too salesy on you, right? Because that's not my gig. I'll tell you, I'm immensely proud of the team. Through COVID, we very rarely, if ever, dipped below a 90% accuracy rating, and we measure that by basically actual, the absolute actual versus predicted difference. So really, it's an error rate, but that doesn't really play well in marketing, right? Admitting you made an error. No, it doesn't work that way. But anyway, that's what makes them sleep at night. So by and large, since the initial reverberations of COVID, we've been trending 95 to 96% plus accuracy with the model and the short-term model. And our long-term model, so we predict anything from 1 day out to 52 weeks out. And we're actually working on some long-term econometric stuff at the moment behind the scenes. But in our long-term forecast, 6 months out is still hovering over 90% accuracy. And then the long-term, you're still dealing with a lot of that COVID stuff in the spring of last year, right? So a lot of the predictions that are wrapping up now were made back then, right? So last July, last June, whatever. We're still, very, very pleased with the accuracy of those models. And that's just a testament to our process, but ultimately, like, the decades worth of historical actual paid freight data that we have in our repositories that allows us to build these, because there's other people in our space, other companies that have data science talent. They just don't have the data, right? And you need both to really kind of go to market effectively.
Right. Yeah. Good point. So a good segue there about digging in the freight markets. And, while we talk about freight, if you could focus on Georgia and Southeast, that'd be helpful to our listeners. So I was on your DAT IQ live this morning and heard you talking about rates cooling off some, but still at historically high levels. Can you talk about what you've been seeing in the market and forecast over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, so I mean, rates have definitely ticked down. 4th of July was as expected, very busy, very peaky. You have produce coming new ahead. Again, not being over, just sort of peaking out. largely driven by the harvest schedules and consumer demand, right? All the slices of watermelons at the picnic and all of that kind of stuff that kind of ship up out of that area. I think this will be the litmus test for what the second half of the year really has in store. Like, how much do things truly cool off in these next 3 to 4 weeks? So the first week post 4th of July, so if you don't want to kind of hedge it or target against 4th of July, let's just think of like the first week of the second half of the year, second week, third week, right? If things continue to trend down and sort of follow that pattern, I'm less concerned with the absolute numbers, like the degree to which they cool. I'm just interested to see if seasonality begins to assert itself. For really the first time this year, in kind of a normal way. That'll really be telling, because eventually we're going to get into this back to school, back to work, back to college, all that kind of stuff that's going to precede the retail shipping peak at Black Friday and that kind of stuff. So it's really going to be a telling 4 to 6 weeks of time period here that we're in to see how the second half of the year is going to shape up. I think you're going to continue to see, like Dean mentioned this morning, Dean Croak, our principal industry analyst, Florida starting to cool off. Just as produce starts very far south and builds north, the kind of the cresting over that peak exhibits the same behavior. So we'll start to see some of that. Didn't see a huge impact from Elsa as it blew through. Some localized power outages, flooding, things like that. But by all indications, we're going to have an active tropical season. So we'll be paying very, very close attention to that as we head into the summer months.
Yeah. So you touched on the produce season, the peak kind of being over. More on the downslide. What about you talked about the holiday season, Black Friday? When does that typically gear up?
So ocean traffic would start to be gearing up here in the next few weeks to a month or so. Almost across the board, we're hearing from shippers and contacts in the ocean and drayage industry that the stuff's already being scheduled, if not already coming over. Inventory is a major buzzword amongst shippers, especially retail and e-commerce right now. So they want to get that inventory landed, drayed, and then ultimately stocked in a warehouse as soon as they possibly can to prevent any sort of disruption. That's especially important with all of the widespread shortages across so many different sectors, right? Every morning, it seems like I'm reading or hearing a news story about patio furniture or barbecue grills or sporting good equipment that's still, sporting equipment is still running. They're basically in month 12 to 14 of their COVID shortage in certain different sectors. So the bicycle aisle of most of your big box retailer, sporting good retailers is still very sparsely populated. So I think they'll try to flatten out the peakiness of the ramp up to stock for Black Friday and back to school. And that I would expect that shipping to start landing in the coming weeks to hopefully ease some of the peakiness, like I mentioned. It's very similar, right? I still draw back on my energy experience because it's the same kind of thing, right? These peaks, you build for the peaks. So I think the more that you can flatten the peaks, the less stress it takes off the entire system across shippers, carriers, brokers, draymen, warehousers, intermodal, all that kind of stuff.
Right. So the retailers and the shippers pulling things more forward than they have in the past to reduce the peaks and get this just-in-time concept is no longer too valid, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on if it's going to be a suspension of that concept or if it's going to cause some folks. This is the second time in roughly 3 years that they've been totally burned by the just-in-time, like the just-in-time, right? Like the skin of your teeth just-in-time. Will it cause some shippers to rethink that strategy? Who knows? There's a lot of capital that's been invested over the last decade in building the infrastructure for that just-in-time apparatus. So it remains to be seen what happens with that long-term. Short-term, for sure. They want to get it landed. They want to get it, if they can get retail space. Cross-dock space is basically completely and totally evaporated nationwide. You're seeing, how do we know that? You're seeing record increases in mileage distance for dray moves, right? Because you can't cross-dock it, you can't transload it. All of the typical mechanisms, LTL is absolutely and totally blown up, right? You see in the news FedEx dropping 1,200 customers. You're seeing these huge surcharges go in place very early. So, without direct evidence of these things landing early, we just look at the tea leaves. Another big one was UPS announced their peak surcharges way earlier than they typically would, and they're pretty substantial, ramping all the way up to $6.25 per package heading into peak. And they're pegging those volumes off of February 2020, the slowest month for freight in 30 years. So it's all shaping up to be quite a hectic peak, I think, this fall.
Yeah. So capacity constraints seem to be a main driver of the rates. What are your thoughts on the driver shortage, the drug and alcohol clearinghouse? There's 50 to 60,000 drivers in prohibited status, and the driver schools and the number of people coming out of those.
I think that last part you mentioned is the most important to this specific discussion. I think there's going to be this intersection of when the new Class 8 truck or the physical units are going to come online and to ensure that we have enough drivers to handle that. The long-term trend of driver shortage, so I don't even want to call it that. I think that should almost be branded and trademarked. Like the long-term trend of available driver capacity, let's call it that. I don't think it'll be very affected by COVID, quite frankly. I think there are cycles along that long-term trend, so I don't even really think that is in play here. I think it's the driving schools. I think it's going to be competition amongst more advantageous driving positions. So think about day cab work, short haul stuff that's paying very well right now will naturally keep drivers out of the long haul, away from your family, going out for weeks or months at a time kind of thing. So there's going to be a lot of internal competition within the industry that's going to keep drivers potentially in short supply on the long haul trucking side for the foreseeable future. I also think let's get away from the numbers for a minute. The number one by far career change, right? So the way that there's a lot of marketing and spin that happens about kind of the driver market as a whole. So to cut through some of that, one of the popular things you hear is, well, the average age of a driver has increased every year for the last however many years. Well, there's a lot of people who enter this industry later in life as like a secondary career. When their body fails them, when they're doing a physical job, a labor job, when they get a little money saved up and they want to invest in a truck and become an owner operator and they get the bug, so they buy some more trucks. So there's a lot of ways people get into the trucking market later in life. One of those ways is the construction, right? You're working a construction job, either economic conditions change and you're not as busy, or you can't physically do the work anymore. But we all know what's happening in construction right now. All-time high pay. It's very lucrative to be in that profession right now. So you're not seeing as many folks transition into trucking as a secondary later in life career. So I think there's a lot of factors at play, but those are the ones I'm watching kind of closest. Drug and alcohol clearinghouse remains to be seen how that kind of impacts. There hasn't been a lot of legislation or regulatory change in the last decade or so that's been advantageous for driver recruitment. Yeah. There's a lot of talk about whether they lower the age to 18 for CDL, even if it's just for local stuff. I think that's a different topic that I'm not, Dean's probably more well-versed to speak on.
Sure, yeah, understood. But also touch on the equipment side. So, Class 8 truck orders at all-time highs, but one of those orders going to turn into actual trucks rubber hitting the road. And, semiconductors, part of the reason that you mentioned earlier this morning about the resins. Yep. What are your thoughts on when those orders turn into actual equipment on the road?
First half of 22, anything being ordered now, you're looking at first half of 22, unless you're getting some kind of unique agreement where you have a unique build out or build spec, or you get a canceled order or something like that. So that's why I think you're going to see this huge spike over the next few months. Will be a surprising spike, I would predict, just because you're going to have a lot of pent up demand once the OEMs officially open the 22 order books. And that's not, again, our theme for the show this morning was no hot takes. That's a pretty common perception among folks that are tracking this closely, is that essentially there was a lot of hand waving around. Why even order it if it's not going to be delivered in a 21 slot? Might as well get in on the 22 slot. May open up some new features, or however they're going to be speccing out the equipment. You're still growing at a 70% year over year increase, and double digits sequentially from an orders perspective. It's just nowhere near where it could be if they were actually expecting to get equipment this year. We're over 400,000 equipments ordered in the last 12 months. I do suspect, as it always happens, we will reach a state of excess equipment by the end of this whole thing, which will result in canceled orders, and, trucking bankruptcies and whatnot. But most of the industry consensus heading into this year is that would happen this calendar year. And I don't think anyone believes that anymore. You're probably looking at somewhere in Q2, Q3 of next year before we start to see major turns in the market.
Right. Understood. So changing gears a little, earlier in the year, I heard experts talking about decrease in freight as consumers start spending or shifting from goods to services. What are your thoughts on that? Did that shift happen, or will it happen, or was that?
I think present company included, that was a big miss amongst the industry analysts. I think we misjudged how much shipping is actually going to be related to this return to the service economy. So supporting hotels, large sporting and other kind of gatherings. A lot of these restaurants that perhaps didn't order a lot of the necessities, that they needed, that had to be shipped kind of all of a sudden and all at once. I mean, think like paper products and, silverware and linens and all that stuff. Bus bins, plastic trash cans. I mean, all of these things have been in like remarkably short supply, and they all come on a truck, right? So also, I think one of the reasons we misjudged it a bit is sort of the new service economy, in a sense that it's people moving around and maybe grabbing an Airbnb and sort of basically doing everything they would have done at home, just kind of like in a different zip code, right? So it still is requiring goods and services, and they might be buying things while they're there that they're going to bring home, or, you go to the beach and you buy a beach chair and you leave it there, or, you need an umbrella. So all of these things require shipping. It's just been, like I said, there's a lot of freight to move around for sure. We aren't seeing these kind of outlandish increase in total freight volumes anymore, but the fact that it's holding steady, kind of regardless of everything else that's going on, is what's kind of caused this perceived extreme tightness in the market. So yeah, I mean, freight volumes are high, higher than we would have expected, even with the shift to service, because you definitely have seen a shift to service. We just haven't seen, one, there's been a lot more kind of consumer goods that have been required as a result of that shift to service, and two, a lot of the spending at home hasn't went away. People still have money in their pocket. They're still out there spending, still buying stuff, things like that.
Sure. Well, Ken's been great and very informative. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today. Before we wrap up, one last question on your thoughts for the second half of the year and going into next year for truckers.
So I think all signs point to, like I mentioned earlier, a very, very busy second half of the year. We might see a lull here, for the next 4 to 6 weeks before things really start to pick up, especially in the trucking side. I think that'll be good. Allow people to catch up, do some of the required maintenance, things like that, to get really ready for peak. I think what most people don't realize, because they maybe never have worked for one of the big kind of monolithic giants in the industry, is all that parcel volume is backed up by billions of dollars of purchased external transportation amongst the rails and over the road trucking. And it's a lot of parcels, right, that are being taken off a plane in a loading container, put on the back of a truck, on a roller bed truck, and moved hub to hub, point to point, however that might work in this specific instance. So I expect it to be busy. H1 of next year, there will almost inevitably be the inflection point in the freight cycle. I'm not smart enough, I'm not a fortune teller to tell anyone when that's going to happen. Hopefully, as things become more clear in the second half of this year, we can start to make some more educated predictions of what that looks like. But this is a cyclical market. I think it would shock everyone to the point of exasperation if that aspect of our industry changed. I don't see that being very feasible. So I would expect sometime in the first half of next year, things to start to go back to what we would call normal, and start to head back towards contract markets, rebuilding relationships between shippers and carriers, and moving freight out of the spot market and back to the contract market where it's historically belonged. So that's sort of the story at the moment.
Got it. Well, great. Thank you again so much for your time today, Ken, and congratulations on your new little boy. I'm sure you're a proud father, and I hope you're getting some sleep.
I don't know about that. My mother-in-law was over last night, so I feel refreshed because I knew I had a whole slate of meetings today, but I really appreciate it. And thanks for having me on. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, that wraps up our show for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Please let us know your comments and feedback in the comments box below, and make it a great day.